Hi, welcome to my channel where you will find lifestyle and fitness content. My name is Michelle and in today's video I'm going to be talking to you about the books I read in 2023. But to be honest with you, this video is basically going to be a fangirling session about the Hunger Games. Okay, we're gonna start with very short and quick non-spoiler reviews about the books, and then we are diving into a spoiler discussion about them. And before we begin, I just have to say that we are only going to be talking about the books, not the movies, mainly because of time. I don't want this video to be even longer than what it is going to be. And also, I'm not a professional book reviewer or anything like that. My star ratings are mostly based on my enjoyment, and I'm just your random fangirl, okay? So, nothing professional here. But yeah, let's begin. Okay, so first we're starting with The Hunger Games. I first read this book back in 2013, and actually this book was the one that got my teenage self back into reading, and now this is the book that got me back into reading in my 20s, which I think it's a fun little coincidence. And what happened this time around was that basically I got burnt out because of college and personal issues, so I fell into a reading slump around 2020, and I haven't been reading until 2023. Unless we're counting fanfics, because if we are, then I have never really stopped reading between 2020 and 2023, but I'm not really counting those fanfics and I'm getting sidetracked. I'm so sorry. Okay, so The Hunger Games. The Hunger Games was the first book I read in the year, and the reason I wanted to reread this book was because of the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes movie coming out. And at that point in time, that book was still in my TBR list, so I wanted to first reread the whole trilogy and then read the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. The reason was because I wanted to be fully immersed once again in the Hunger Games world, so I would be able to catch all the references in this new book, all that good stuff. So I made a small book club with one of my friends and we started our The Hunger Games renaissance, if you will. And honestly, it was amazing to come back to this book series and also having someone to discuss as I was reading. Okay, so this is my third or fourth time, I think it's the fourth time rereading this series, and it is always a pleasure to come back and read this story. No matter how many times I have read it, Suzanne always manages to have me hooked to this story. This book is super engaging and such a fast read, and like I said, this book helped me to get out of my reading slump, which I really appreciate. I finished this book in just 4 days, which is something that I hadn't been able to do for a long time. And it is such a well-written story. The world building is executed really well, and so are the characters. So I give this book 5 out of 5 stars. My second book of 2023 was actually a fanfic, and I am counting this fanfic because it is a fanfic that makes sense in this video, so bear with me. This is a fanfic that I've forgotten to read for years, and the fanfic is Peeta's Games. And oh my god, I really like this. I loved getting to see the story from Peeta's POV. I think the author did an incredible job, and I have seen that a lot of people don't agree with what I'm about to say, but I felt as if I was reading something Suzanne Collins wrote. I mean, obviously not to a 100% because everyone has their own writing style, but it just felt right. I love the author's attention to detail, the way they portrayed Peeta's way of thinking and perceiving things, and how the author wrote what went down on Peeta's end. Because it just made so much sense. So I give this fanfic 5 out of 5 stars. Then we have the one, the only, the queen of the book series, Catching Fire.
Ladies and gentlemen, her.
If you couldn't tell, this is my favorite book in the series. It always has been and it still is. The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes was not able to take this book's spot in my personal ranking. Suzanne Collins wrote a sequel that's even better than the first installment, which is a huge milestone because the first book is incredible. And Catching Fire is full of surprises and twists, and even though I already knew what was gonna happen, I was still unable to put the book down. And the ending of this book always manages to make me cry my eyes out. The author keeps doing an amazing job at character development and at introducing new characters. And actually, one of my favorite characters makes his first appearance in this book. Lastly, I just have to say that this is such a well-paced, action-packed, and thrilling sequel, so obviously this gets a 5 out of 5 stars from me. Next up, we have another fanfic, which is Throwing Sparks, which is Catching Fire from Peeta's perspective. And oh boy, was this good! I really enjoyed this fanfic. The author once again blew me totally away with their attention to detail and with how they write Peeta. And honestly, after reading Peeta's games, I was really curious to read this book from Peeta's perspective, and I was not disappointed. We also learned more about how Peeta dealt with his trauma and heartbreak after the games, about his family dynamics, his friends, and also we get to see more of his bond with Haymitch and Portia. And the ending. The ending. I was on the edge of my seat and I was crying my eyes out. It was really interesting but heartbreaking to read about this part of the book from Peeta's perspective, as it all made sense. So this was such an amazing read. It gets 5 out of 5 stars. Then we have Mockingjay. This book is such a fast read as a lot of things keep happening, so it keeps you hooked from the beginning of the story. Mockingjay is an engaging, suspenseful, and thrilling read, but I do have to say that I think there were some parts that could have been paced a bit better, especially towards the end, because I felt some events felt rushed when they could have been fleshed out a little bit better. And I kinda understand why Suzanne Collins wanted to do it this way, because I think she wanted to show how some stuff happens too fast, especially in war. But I think that sometimes she overdid it a little bit. And even though I wish some stuff was handled a little bit better, I really enjoyed this book, so I have never really quite understood why this book gets so much hate from some people in the fandom. I think that overall it makes sense that this book is the way it is, and I think it did a good job at closing the story. And even though Mockingjay is not nearly as good as its predecessors, it is a great read nonetheless. I give this book 4 out of 5 stars. Now it's time to talk about the Mutt, Mockingjay from Peeta's POV. And man, was I nervous about reading this one. I knew this one was gonna hurt, and it definitely did. This was absolutely heartbreaking to read. The author made a really good job at writing this. They also did a phenomenal job at depicting Peeta's mental state. And I also just love how the author gave Peeta even more depth throughout the series, as we learn more about his backstory, his friends, family dynamics, his bond with Haymitch and Portia, etc. I don't know, but this fanfic series just made me love Peeta even more. It was really interesting to learn more about him, and yeah, this fanfic broke my heart and it made me cry a lot. It was very well written, so I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. Then we have Back to 12. This is the conclusion to the fanfic Peeta's Game series. And fun fact, I did not read this one in 2023. I read it in January 2024, but I wanted to include it in this video because it makes more sense for this, for my discussion, my thoughts about this book, about this fanfic, to be in this video. Okay, even though I really like this fic, I definitely like the first 3 way more. The author did a very good job at giving us more details about what happened in between the last chapter of Mockingjay and the epilogue. It was a good read. There was some stuff that I really liked and a lot of it made sense, but there were also a few things that I didn't like as much and that didn't feel 100% right for me. But still, it was a lovely fic and the ending was heartwarming and it made me smile like an idiot. I gave this one 3.5 out of 5 stars. Lastly, we have The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. This was a very interesting book. For starters, it is from the perspective of Coriolanus Snow, when he was younger and before he became the president of Panem. In this prequel, we learn more about the Hunger Games and how they ended up being the way they were in the trilogy, because in its early years, they were very different. We also get to see more of the capital and how it works, and obviously we get to learn more about Coriolanus Snow, how he was a charming, controlling, and a strategic person from the get-go. He's manipulative, extremely intelligent, and a calculating person, always thinking of landing on top.
Snow lands on top.
But we also get to see a softer side to him, which shocked me, not gonna lie. And we get to see this side of him thanks to the people he cares about. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars, and the reason why I didn't give this book a higher rating was because of the pacing. The beginning of the story felt a little bit too slow at times. Then it picked up and I was totally engaged and I couldn't put the book down. But then at the end, the story felt a little bit rushed. Don't get me wrong, it was still engaging and it was keeping me at the edge of my seat, but I would have loved if we got that last part a little bit more fleshed out. Also, I still have a few questions that I thought would be answered in this book, and not getting those answers was a little bit disappointing. Mainly the question that I wanted answered was one regarding Snow's family. But overall, Suzanne Collins did an incredible job with world building, explaining where some things from the trilogy came from, and also explaining how Snow ended up being the Snow that we knew from the trilogy. Okay, so that's it for the spoiler-free mini reviews. Now let's jump into the spoilery discussion. And I'm mostly going to focus on the Peeta's Games fanfics and the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, because these are the ones that are new to me and I made a lot of notes about them to discuss with my friend, but now I'm gonna end up using these notes for this video. I promise I really tried to summarize them and, organize them as best as I could to avoid rambling for too long, but yeah, I'm so sorry in advance because this is probably still going to be a little bit unhinged and all over the place. I'm gonna bring my notes here. I hope you don't mind. But okay, let's start with the Hunger Games / Peeta's Games. I love how the author gave us more details about how some things came to be, such as Peeta's decision to talk about his feelings for Katniss at the interview, how he ended up with the careers, his experience with the careers, Peeta's fight with Cato to protect Katniss after the Tracker Jacker attack, how he survived through the days where he was camouflaged and injured, and also his perspective of the whole star-crossed lover act once they were together. And another very cool detail was seeing how Peeta, since the first book, started to have nightmares about Katniss being a Mutt. Katniss having a silvery shine when he was delirious in the arena, and also the author started teasing the real or not real a little bit too, as Peeta sometimes didn't know what to believe, whether because he was delirious or because he couldn't trust if Katniss was being honest or was just acting. All of this was really good foreshadowing to how the Capitol was later able to hijack him in Mockingjay. One of my favorite parts about this fanfic was reading the whole breath scene from his perspective. The author wrote it so damn well, and I just love this man so much. Another thing I also really liked was learning about the merchants. It was interesting to get a glimpse into the merchant's lifestyle, and the way the author wrote this story just made so much sense to me. Like, the attention to detail was top tier, and the author's take on Peeta is really, really good. Also, it was really interesting to get more info about Peeta's family dynamics because we don't get much of it in the books. The author did a great job at writing this aspect of his life because it made so much sense for Peeta's character. Another thing I really liked is that we get to see what happened to Peeta after the games before recap night, the medical procedures, and how he learned that he lost his leg. Another interesting thing was reading how Peeta was acting out of his love for Katniss in the recap night and in the last interview, while Katniss was freaking out about appeasing the capital after the berries. Okay, now let's move on to Catching Fire slash throwing sparks. The author once again does an incredible job at writing Peeta. I really enjoy how it is done. In this second installment, we get to see how Peeta felt about learning that the arena romance was fake. We see how he experiences the heartbreak because he had thought that the romance was real. We also get to see him deal with his prosthetic and the frustration and confusion he feels towards it, which I found really interesting to read because we didn't get a lot of insight into how he felt about his prosthetic in the books, and I feel like it is a very important part of Peeta's character. So it was great to see the author including it and making it a relevant issue in the story. Also, we get to see more interactions between Haymitch and Peeta, which I really loved because we see how they both care in their own way for each other, and also getting to see more conversations one-on-one between the two. For example, Peeta and Haymitch's conversation after the quell is announced had me sobbing. Another aspect that the author dived more into was Peeta's trauma after the games. We knew from the books that he, like Katniss, dealt with nightmares, but there was not a lot of details about the nightmares. Here we see how the nightmares weigh him down, how he barely sleeps because he dreads sleeping as he's scared of what will happen in his dreams. We really see the pain and numbness the games brought him from his own perspective, which is absolutely heartbreaking to read. We also get to know more about Peeta's family dynamics, and we get even more in this fic than we did in the last. We also see how Peeta struggles to be with his parents, especially due to his own childhood experience with them, and also because of how much he changed after the games. And I really like how the author wrote about this aspect in Peeta's life because it really matches with what we read about it in the books. And we also get to know more about his extended family, his uncle and cousins, and the complexities surrounding the Melarks. And we also understand why we barely see Peeta's family in the books, which is really interesting. And we also get more of Peeta's friends, and this gives us an even bigger insight into how different townies are from people from the sim. Also, something I truly loved was getting to see how the author developed Portia and Peeta's bond. Because I really love Katniss and Cinna's friendship so much, so it was nice to see that Peeta also had a beautiful relationship with his own stylist. Plus, I think it was very well written and it just made me love Portia a lot. And lastly, I have to talk about the quarter quell. First of all, it was awesome to get the interviews from Peeta's perspective, and I just have to quickly mention the movies because Josh Hutcherson did such an incredible job at delivering the line. His facial expression, the stutter, it was perfection. And also the shirt look between Haymitch and Peeta after he drops that line, it was just absolutely amazing. I love it.
If it weren't for the baby.
Anyway, it was really interesting to see the quarter quell from Peeta's eyes. I love seeing how well he knows Katniss and how he's trying so hard to keep her safe, especially because we know that Katniss is doing the exact same thing. And one of my favorite scenes from this fic was the kiss on the beach. I love it so much. But then we have the whole ending part, and that destroyed me. That wrecked me so hard. The author did an amazing job at writing how this was for Peeta, but it broke me. It broke my heart into a million pieces to see his desperation to find Katniss and then to see him get captured with Joanna. Okay, now it's time for the Mutt slash Mockingjay. The author did a phenomenal job at depicting Peeta's confusion and struggle to sort through his memories. The transitions between his memories and the present are seamless and very, very well written. I was really impressed and absolutely heartbroken from the get go. And reading this fic at first is really confusing because, like I said, the transitions between his past memories, his altered memories, and the present are so seamless, but it makes so much sense to have this last book from Peeta's perspective to be written this way, as his mind is a mess after what the Capitol did to him. And something that I loved to read in this fic was Peeta and Prim interacting. I loved reading their interactions because it makes sense that the Capitol didn't have enough footage of her and Peeta, so that left a hole. And Prim knows it and uses it to help Peeta. And something that was really painful to read was how Peeta tried to hold on to Katniss to resist the torture and brainwashing from the Capitol. He really fought for a very long time, and I don't know, it was just really heartbreaking. I cried a lot reading this fic. And something I loved as well was how the author made Haymitch to be the one to ground both Katniss and Peeta when they were being too hard on each other. In Mockingjay, he talks to Katniss after she calls Peeta a mutt and tells her that if she had been the one hijacked, Peeta wouldn't treat her that way, that Peeta would be doing anything to get her back. And in the Mutt, Haymitch talks to Peeta after his harsh encounter with Katniss when she visits Peeta after Annie and Phoenix's wedding in District 13. I also like how the author addresses the pain Peeta felt after losing all of his family in the District 12 bombing, because it's important for the character to acknowledge and experience his grief and pain. And another thing I loved about this fic was getting to read more about Peeta's bonds with Deli, Finnick, and especially with Joanna. Going back to the things that wrecked me and destroyed my heart, something that broke me was the green and orange mantra that Peeta chose when he was getting hijacked in the Capitol, how he tried to use it to not let them change the way he thinks and feels about Katniss. I love how the author wrote about Peeta getting better, how slowly he starts remembering the real Katniss, and also I love the fact that there's always been that part of him that still wants to protect Katniss, even when he was still really affected by the hijacking. There's glimpses of the old Peeta trying to keep Katniss safe. These impulses are not strong, but they are there, and as the story progresses, we see those impulses get stronger. And I also love how the author didn't make Peeta's recovery linear, as it wouldn't have been realistic and true to what Suzanne Collins wrote. Peeta's recovery is messy and he has a lot of setbacks, and I love seeing that, because it feels more real and it feels like what happened in Mockingjay. And I also love how Peeta slowly starts remembering the feeling that he and Katniss have to stick together, that they both have to be there for each other. And one of my favorite scenes in this fic was the "Stay with me always." It was so beautifully written, and I just love it so much. I also love how the author wrote Peeta's intelligence, how smart he is, and how good he is at reading people and at being compassionate. Like I mentioned before, I love the bond between Portia and Peeta, how it is as strong as the one between Katniss and Cinna, and I love how Portia was the one who told Peeta about the bombing in District 12 and the bombing that was gonna happen on District 13. Another thing I love is that Peeta was the one who saved Katniss after the bombs exploded at the president's mansion in the capital, because this has always been like a headcanon of mine, and the author did a fantastic job writing it. And lastly, another interesting thing was seeing how Peeta helped during Katniss's trial after she killed Coin. It makes so much sense for him to be involved in the trial, and I love seeing how he knows what he has to say to help her, as he has always done since the beginning. Now let's quickly talk about Back to 12. Okay, so I completely adored how the author gave us more about how Peeta and Katniss interacted after they went back to District 12. I like how the author addressed Katniss and Peeta's mental health, how they slowly warmed up to each other, and how we get to see their relationship throughout the years. It was just really, really beautiful. And the author not only gave us more about Katniss and Peeta's relationship, they also gave us more about Panem after the war, and about other characters such as Haymitch, Katniss's mother, Annie and her baby, Joanna, Deli, and Gale. It was really interesting and realistic to read how things weren't perfect after the war, how it was hard to start again and try to do it better, how some of the struggles of the old Panem are still there, and how they're working on overcoming them. Okay, now we have the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And I have a lot to talk about this one. First of all, straight off the bat, we are hit with information that Tigris is Snow's cousin. Like, what? And this is one of the main things I wanted answers to in this book, because how in the hell does Tigris goes from loving Snow so much to wanting him dead? Like, we know Snow is a horrible person, and we know what Tigris says about him in Mockingjay. But I thought we were going to have a more elaborated answer in this book. Anyway, in the first few pages, Snow talks about his problem of fixating on a problem, which ends up blinding him to other things that could harm him, which is something that we see in Mockingjay, when Snow tells Katniss that he was watching her and she was watching him, and then Coin took them both for fools. Also, we learned that Snow thinks control is the key to happiness, to have a good life. He thinks that the whole system keeping chaos at bay would collapse without the capital, which is something that he mentions to Katniss in Catching Fire. In this book, we also get to learn more about how the capital works, the depths that end up making capital citizens into peacekeepers, keeping up appearances, the greed and hypocrisy. And we also get more info about the Dark Days and how the capital was impacted by them. We learn how Snow came from a rich family that fell into poverty, and that he knows what it is like to be poor and experience hunger, but that didn't stop him from forcing a whole country into that when he was president. We also learn how he suffered during the Dark Days, and how the rebels made him and his family struggle, and how he only sees that, the pain the rebels caused him and his family. He does not see the pain the rebels experienced at the hands of the capital. We also see how Snow does good things in this book, but not always for the right reasons. Mainly, the reason is just to make himself look good, so to keep up appearances. We also see how different the games were at first, and how they came up with the concept we knew from the trilogy, how people in the capital didn't like to watch them at first, and how they weren't celebrated. the way we saw later on. We get to see how the mentors are trying to make the games more appealing, and the only thing I could think about was how cruel, sick, and twisted they sounded, because this school project was how they came up with many of the stuff we see in the games later on. And actually, Snow is the one that comes up with a lot of the stuff that we know from the games. And when I read that he was the one responsible for a lot of these things, it was like, of course. Of course he was. We also get to see how some mentors get attached to their tributes because they get to know them, Snow being one of them. And that reminded me of how the citizens of the capital hated the Quell in Catching Fire because they were attached to their victors, which I think is a really interesting parallel. Another really interesting thing that we learn is the importance of the roses, which probably came from his grandmother's love for this flower. And also it probably came from his mother's powder compact, which had a rose engraved on it, and it had a floral scent. And the thing is that Snow used this floral scent from his mother's compact to calm himself down. So one of my theories is that maybe he wanted that intense rose smell to help himself calm down as an adult, hence why he loved his roses so much in the trilogy. Now I want to quickly talk about Sejanus because I love him and because his story is really interesting. How he was from District 2 and ended up in the capital due to his father's business with munitions, and how he feels guilty over it. How he feels like a traitor to the districts, and how much he and his mother miss their home back in 2. It was also interesting to see how Sejanus really loves and cares for Corio as a brother. He is basically the only friend he has in the capital, and I do believe Snow cared for Sejanus the more time he spent with him. At first he was just civil and polite to keep up appearances, but then he was more involved in making sure he didn't do anything stupid, and he tried to help him sometimes to keep him alive and out of trouble. But there's also the fact that Snow saw Sejanus as less than him because he came from the districts and because of his way of thinking. And also we have the whole betrayal with the Jabberjays, and sure, Snow felt guilty, as he should, but then the son of a bitch proceeded to take advantage of Sejanus' death, and he became the plinth heir. That just made me think that he never saw him as a friend. He only saw him as a way to get what he wanted. Okay, now let's briefly talk about Dr. Gull because she is freaking insane. She's brutal, ruthless, and just evil. And she was an interesting character to read, but she scared the living shit out of me. And she had a great deal to do with the way Snow ended up being, because a lot of her teachings can be seen in the Snow that we read about in the trilogy. And Corio has his moments in which you see he realizes that the games are wrong and that the way they treat the people from the districts is not good. He is sometimes able to see the callousness and cruelty of the capital towards the districts, but it is really sad to see those moments because we know how he ends up being the same or even worse. And to me, it was really insane to see how Snow was also a pawn to the capital and then proceeded to do the same thing to others. The censorship, the punishments, the manipulation. There are moments in which he seems to be against this and the brutality and the violence of the games. But like I said, it's really sad knowing how he later encourages it and thinks the same way as Dr. Gao, and he ends up doing the same things. Now let's talk about Lucy Gray and Snow. Lucy Gray brought out the best in Corio at first. He seemed to really care about her, but also he cared for her success. in the games because it was tied with his own success. But I'm not gonna lie, there were times where I shipped Corio and Lucy Gray. He seemed to care and like her a lot, but he was also really possessive and controlling of her. And I don't know, it was just really confusing. So most of the time, I was just like, Lucy Gray, run, run, get the hell out of there. Ron, you deserve so much better. Also, I just want to mention a little theory I have, and that is that maybe Snow hates Peeta and Katniss so much because their love and the obstacles they had to deal with were reminiscent of the ones he and Lucy Gray struggled with as well. Katniss and Peeta being both tributes, and Snow and Lucy Gray being mentor and tribute. Also, I have to quickly mention the song Lucy Gray wrote for him. That song was beautiful and he did not deserve it. It warmed my heart to read his thoughts about it, but like I said, he did not deserve that song. But we can see how Snow wants Lucy Gray to see him as a good person, as her hero. Okay, moving on, we have the Peacekeeper storyline, which had me shook, but it was so interesting to get a glimpse into the life of peacekeepers, and I still can't believe Snow was one. I mean, it makes sense now that I think about it, but I can't believe he saw firsthand the lives of the people in the districts and still allowed it when he was a president. And also, I can't believe he lived for a short time in District 12. It was really weird reading Snow being in the places Katniss has been, like the Seam, the Hub, the Meadow, her forest, the lake, the little house by the lake where Katniss played as a kid, and where she found the District 8 woman in Catching Fire. Also, Snow was there when the events of the Hanging Tree song happened. And Lucy Gray was the one who wrote the song. That was really shocking to me, and getting this whole info about the song makes it even more impactful in Mockingjay, and I really like that Suzanne Collins did this. Also, Snow's stay in 12 was when he was first introduced to Mockingjays, and he didn't like them at all. You have no idea how much I loved reading how he didn't like Mockingjays, because we know Katniss is the Mockingjay who destroyed his tyranny, and there's also a lot of parallels between the Mockingjays and Katniss. Snow hates Mockingjays because of their spontaneous creation, because he hates how nature used the capital's technology to create something else entirely, which to me is a parallel to Katniss using the platform the Capitol gave her to ignite the rebellion. Also, he hates how Mockingjays can't be controlled nor silenced like Jabberjays can, which also reminded me of Katniss. And we can say that at first Katniss was a Jabberjay because she was letting Snow tell her what to do, but then when she becomes the Mockingjay, we see that she is doing everything she can to bring down the capital, and she cannot be controlled nor silenced by Snow anymore. And I also love how the Mockingjays seem to dislike Snow as well. Okay, now let's talk about the ending. And here's where I realized Snow didn't love Lucy Gray that much, because he was really quick to forget about her when he got offered to go to the elite officers school in District 2. The only reason he didn't want it to go was because of the possibility of getting charged for the murder of Mayfair. And that's basically the only reason why he wants to run away with Lucy Gray. But once they're in the woods, we see that he's not really happy about having to run away. But then, when they reach the lake, he finds the murder weapon, and he realizes that he can get rid of the evidence of his crime and therefore go back safely. And once again, he's very quick to drop Lucy Gray and their escape plans. He loves her, but he loves himself way more and cares more about his own comfort, success, and well-being. Plus, he didn't like the wilderness. But then, he also realizes that there's one problem. Lucy Gray, who knows about the murder. At first, he tries to convince himself that she's not a threat to his future, but he ends up spiraling and he goes full psycho and goes after her to kill her. And when he goes out to hunt her down, we see Lucy Gray using the Mockingjays and the Hanging Tree song to cover her, which is a detail I really liked. And also, I love how Lucy Gray's last words to Snow were that she was going for Katniss. Like, that was such an amazing detail. Susan Collins, your brain. But yeah, to end this video, I just want to share some similarities I found between Katniss and Lucy Gray because they have a lot. I mean, personality-wise, Lucy Gray is more similar to Peeta, but some details about Lucy Gray's life are really similar to Katniss. So yeah, let's begin. Okay, first up we have that both of them are from District 12 and both are from the Seam. Both Lucy Gray and Katniss are singers and the Mockingjays stop to listen while they sing. They have a goat. Lucy Gray has Seamus and Katniss has Lady. Both have a girl who they love so much. Lucy Gray has Maud Ivory and Katniss has Prim. And both of them love the forest and they wanted to run away from 12 to the woods. And lastly, we have that both of them lost their fathers. And to end this video, I just want to share with you a little theory that I have, and that theory is that maybe Katniss's dad could have been related to the Kobe somehow, and that's why he knew the songs and the places outside of 12's fence. But I'm not really sure about this theory, but at the same time it makes so much sense to me, so yeah, tell me what you think about it. Okay, so that's all I have for you in this video. If you stayed until this point, thank you so much for putting up with my messy rambling and fangirling for so long. I really appreciate it. Anyway, I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye!